Welcome to People, Places, Planet Pod, the official podcast of the Environmental Law Institute, a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization working to ensure a healthy environment, prosperous economies, and vibrant communities founded on the rule of law.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of People, Places, Planet Pod. My name is Dominic Chicatano, and I'm a research associate here at the Environmental Law Institute. As the Environmental Protection Agency prepares to celebrate its 50th anniversary in December 2020, ELI, with the support of Alston Bird, is launching a new oral history project and podcast series entitled The General Counsels Opinions, Conversations with the Attorneys who have led EPA's Office of General Counsel. Our goal is to document the history of the OGC through conversations with the 12 General Counsels. Today I'm here with Kevin Minoli, a current Alston Bird partner who was an attorney in EPA's OGC for 18 years before joining his firm. From January 2017 to January 2018, Kevin had the opportunity to lead the OGC as the EPA's acting General Counsel. During that time, Kevin says he would often look at the list of General Counsels on the EPA's website and wonder what the time leading the office was like for each of them. The General Counsels Opinions podcast series is a chance for Kevin and all of our listeners to hear firsthand accounts of these experiences. Kevin will be joining us throughout the series, each time for a conversation with the former EPA GC. On today's episode, Kevin speaks with Avi Garbow, who is the longest-serving General Counsel in EPA's history, serving from August 2013 to January 2017. Avi's service as EPA General Counsel occurred during the most advanced efforts of the federal government to address climate change, and Avi played important roles in developing, implementing, and defending key domestic and international climate change strategies. Avi is a nationally recognized environmental advocate, lawyer, and leader. He currently serves as Patagonia's environmental advocate, helping to sharpen and strengthen the company's voice and vision on environmental and conservation issues. Thank you to Kevin and Avi for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
I want to share with folks that for most of Avi's tenure, I had the privilege of serving as his principal deputy general counsel. And we're going to be asking each of the general counsels that we speak with the same 12 questions. And we're going to start with what led you to becoming EPA's general counsel?
So I had I guess, a very fortunate path to becoming the general counsel at EPA. I was, Kevin, as you know, a career agency lawyer back in the 90s. And so for many years out of law school, I had the pleasure of working with many of our and your colleagues and others in the enforcement office in the 90s. And so in many ways, when I left government in 2002, EPA was very much kind of in my heart and my agency home, so to speak. When the Obama administration began, I was certainly eager to see if there was an opportunity for me to serve. And when I made those inquiries, it was also clear to me that of all the places that I might be fortunate enough to land, coming back to EPA really was my number one priority. And so, as luck would have it, I was tapped to be the deputy general counsel at the beginning of the Obama administration. And further, as luck would have it, I found out soon thereafter that my boss and my later predecessor, Scott Fulton, would be the general counsel. Scott was somebody that I had known and worked with when I first began at the agency in the early 1990s. So I had a great mentor, as someone to work with and learn from in the years that led up to the second term. And when Scott announced that he was going to be leaving the agency towards the end of the first term of the Obama administration, I certainly let him and others know I'd be honored and interested to be considered by the president for that post, and was thrilled to get that nod by the White House, and even more thrilled to be confirmed by the Senate.
So what was it like?
So it was both familiar and unfamiliar. It was familiar to me in the sense that I knew the agency, I knew the people, because again, I had spent prior the past 4 years to that as the deputy general counsel. So I knew a lot of the issues that were going on, but it was unfamiliar because I think there are aspects of serving as general counsel, and you know a lot of this from your time in the acting capacity there, that are just larger than any one role at the deputy level. And I also found both challenging and exhilarating bridging that gap between the political leadership at the agency and the career staff. I think there was tremendous support and alignment between the two at the time that I was there, and that was, I think, fortunate in many respects. But also kind of understanding the role that you had in the administration, and also the responsibility and the honor to lead the office of predominantly career folks, I found both a challenge, but something I thoroughly enjoyed. And then being able to see every issue at the agency. It's one of the few positions at EPA, aside from the administrator and the deputy administrator, that you have the opportunity to dive into everything from soup to nuts at the agency. So everything substantively that we were dealing with in terms of the many media of the environment and all of the regs under development, but also really at every phase, the beginning of the phase of the regulatory development to the end when things are challenged. And then also you get to deal with the inner workings of the bureaucracy. It is at its core an agency or a building of roughly 15,000 or so people. And like any business, if you are the general counsel or working in a legal capacity there, there's a lot that goes on in terms of ensuring that the operations run smoothly so that the agency can most effectively carry out its mission.
So you mentioned that you thoroughly enjoyed it, but did you have fun? I mean, it's an incredibly difficult job, an incredibly demanding job. Were you able to have fun while you did it?
Oh, absolutely. But I don't want to suggest that every day was fun or every part of every day was fun. It wasn't. And candidly, it shouldn't be. I think I would probably look askance if anybody told me genuinely that every day kind of met that factor. But it was fun in many respects. I mean, it was fun because the people are fantastic there. The people at that agency, and I can speak most kind of specifically about the people in that Office of General Counsel, are extraordinary lawyers, extraordinary professionals, public servants, and just people that you would like to get to know. And so a lot of the fun aspects of it were to be able to share that experience with those folks. Similarly, I had a great deal of fun at times with our political team. Working under Administrator Gina McCarthy was truly a treat just to get to see how she led the agency and sifted through problems and the immense responsibilities and burdens that she had at that level. So there was a lot that was fun. It was also fun, I would say, Kevin, to be part of an administration that I felt was trying to advance strong environmental protection. That's why I was there. We weren't, I think, and I can speak for many of my colleagues, at least in the political echelons there, we weren't there to be part of any administration. We were there to be part of the Obama administration precisely because we felt that it was committed to the mission of EPA.
Looking back, what would you say your biggest challenge was?
I think the biggest challenge for me, again, reflecting on the fact that the position both works with the career staff and the legal team as well as the political leadership, was being able to both understand myself and make sure that our colleagues understood that legal considerations were not always the main driver for a policy outcome. I think oftentimes, certainly as lawyers, you are trained to identify what you think is the least risky legal path, and oftentimes there is a related assumption that because you have done so, that's the right path to go on. And as you and anybody who's worked at the agency knows, our laws aren't really set up that way. There are a variety of factors that ought to come into play when it comes to determining the right levels of standards and how you ought to balance the certainties and uncertainties of the science and any information gaps that you may have. So, the challenge was to, I think, make sure that the administrator and others who were making significant policy decisions fully understood the legal risks, but weren't, if you will, dominated by them.
So it's interesting to me that you identified that as your biggest challenge, and reflecting upon your answer to the prior question about wanting to work in this particular administration because what it stood for and what its environmental direction was. Did you ever see that those two things, that the biggest challenge was partly to help people below you understand when the administration made a decision that wasn't what they had recommended or what they felt was the most defensible or the most environmentally friendly approach?
I don't want to overstate that too much. The fact is that the folks in the Office of General Counsel, certainly those that have been there a long time, really did understand the difference between, for example, legal advice and policy outcomes. And I think that most folks with experience well understood that there was not always a linear path between what a lawyer would say is the most defensible kind of landing point, if you will, versus where the final regulation ended up. I think, our biggest concern and the challenge I think we met very well during that time was making sure that the analysis and that the voice of the Office of General Counsel was heard with clarity and decisiveness by the administrator and those assistant administrators or regional administrators to whom we were providing legal counsel. And that no decision, I think, was made without the thorough vetting of that from a legal standpoint and without a back and forth with not only myself as the general counsel, but with you and others at the deputy general counsel level, and more importantly, with the career staff who, at the end of the day, are the ones that have the greatest amount of environmental law experience in that building.
Looking back, can you isolate what would be your best day and then what would be your worst day of the time that you were serving?
I had a number of best days. It's like asking me what's my favorite album. I've got a top 10 list, but I can't get it down beyond that. I think, among the best days were any time that we could celebrate an accomplishment. One of the things that I did when I was there was to send out on a monthly basis what we called a shout out. And it was an email that we would send to the entire Office of General Counsel, primarily to congratulate folks on things that had been accomplished, and to not necessarily celebrate kind of every milestone, but to make sure that everybody in the office had a sense of the tremendous work that was going on. And so working through those emails and having the opportunity to hit send to the office and share what I could see in my chair as the general counsel with folks in that office who didn't have the same visibility to one another, I always thought that was a really wonderful thing that I could be a part of every month. There were always the opportunities to kind of celebrate and enjoy the camaraderie of the office. I'll tell you that as much as I didn't like retirement events, and anybody who occupies that office attends a number of those, being able to be part of the celebration of people who have devoted their lives to public service and to be able to reflect back on what they did, those were also special moments. And then there were the times like the finalization of the Clean Power Plan, which was the culmination of not just a tremendous effort amongst our lawyers and the Air Office and others in that agency and the administration. But to be able to say that you were a very small part of a big effort to address a global problem, that was a special day.
And how about the flip side, the most challenging, or what I would describe as, what you would describe as the worst day on the job?
Well, that sadly, I do have probably more of a singular recollection. I mean, one of the things that anybody who's in law writ large understands is that there are certain things out of your control, and that in legal proceedings, as best you can present your case and your arguments, there are times when courts make decisions that will either baffle you or you think were in error, but that's the system. And so I have a specific and kind of sad recollection of being in a discussion at the time with the leadership of the agency to continue to work on the Flint, Michigan crisis. And that was where we were trying to make sure that the public health issues stemming from the lead in the drinking water was appropriately dealt with, given all of the significant concerns there. And being able and being handed a note in the midst of those discussions that the Supreme Court had, in an unprecedented manner, stayed the implementation of the Clean Power Plan. The juxtaposition of working to protect the health of the citizens of Flint, and at the same time being told that the greatest effort, at least that we had made to date in the federal government to stem the rising temperatures and climate change was then stayed by the Supreme Court. That is, I think, a moment that I felt very bad about and considered certainly among the most challenging episodes that I can recall.
Do you feel it personally when you have a decision like that from a court, or is it more professional?
Oh, it's both. I think it was hard for me to separate the personal from the professional. I think in part because for me and for many folks there, it wasn't just a job. It was, as they say, a calling. I mean, this was something, working at that agency was the combination of my personal and professional interests and aspirations. And so I was, every investment that I made professionally there in that office was, I think, a personal investment made too. And, so I cared about the outcome. And I also got to see, unlike the folks outside the agency, all of the work that went into that regulation. And I understood what it meant for not just the people in the building, but I think the people around the country. And to see or hear of that decision, it certainly stung both at a professional and personal level.
Other than Supreme Court decisions, what would you wish had gone differently during your time?
So what was not a surprise to me, and I think this is in part because I had the pleasure of spending a couple years in the deputy capacity there, was the amount of times that the agency was sued. And every time they did, at least in my judgment, something of major consequence, there tended to be lawsuits for those who thought we didn't go far enough, and lawsuits by those who felt we went too far. And I think there was a very unfortunate political element to many of those lawsuits. Many I thought were both ill-informed and unfounded, but nevertheless, it's part of the system that we were dealing with. But if you'd asked me what could I change, or what do I wish didn't happen while I was there, and this would go for, I think, anybody, no matter what the administration is, I wish that there was less politics in litigation. I wish that folks focused more on the science. I wish that folks focused more on the rule of law. I think that it would provide a greater deal of certainty in certain ways. And at the end of the day, I kind of found the the split between red states and blue states when it came to attorneys general really disappointing, because I felt, at least certainly while I was there, I felt that a lot of the lawsuits were more politically motivated and in many ways a disservice to the people of those states.
What are you most proud of from your time as general counsel?
I'm proud of the accomplishments of the administration, and including those that I had, frankly, little to nothing to do with. There's many things that I felt a sense of pride being a part of the Obama administration, and having contributed, again, in very small ways or as best I could. I was proud to have the chance to work for and under Gina McCarthy and alongside so many talented people at the political levels. But I was probably most proud of the ways in which I got to know and respect and help to lift up the voice of the career ranks at the agency. I've got, as you know, Kevin, and you feel the same, I'm sure, a tremendous amount of respect for the talent and service of the folks there, and the ability to to bridge that gap again between a political administration and career expertise, I think is one of the best ways to help any administration, frankly, fulfill its priorities, but also to adhere to the rich tradition and mission of EPA. So when I think back on the years that I had there, I probably think most about the advice that few got to hear, but I was kind of proud and privileged enough to spend time hearing myself from the in-house lawyers.
Before I ask you a couple of questions looking forward into the future, is there anything that I haven't asked about your time as general counsel that you'd like to speak to?
I guess the only other thing that I would think about, and this just goes back to being part of a larger administration, I think for most folks in the Office of General Counsel, the majority of your work is either done with your in-house clients at the agency or working very closely in certain respects with our colleagues at the Justice Department when things get litigated. One of the aspects of working as general counsel that I really did enjoy was getting to know and work with kind of colleagues at various other agencies. So the ability to work with the general counsel at the Department of Energy, or the solicitor at the Department of Interior, or the GC at the Department of Ag, and others. And also to work with, I think, the tremendous folks, the White House counsel and others in the White House. That was an extraordinarily enriching opportunity and experience for me, because I had the chance to, in effect, represent the views and legal analysis of our colleagues in the Office of General Counsel and provide, I think, a broader perspective to decisions that were going on outside the agency's building.
So looking now at what you're doing today, tell us a little bit about what life has been like after your time as general counsel, and what are you up to? So
when I left the position at the last day of the Obama administration, I took a couple of weeks off and then soon joined a large international law firm based in the DC office and was able to co-chair its environmental practice. I spent about 2 years in private practice and enjoyed it, had wonderful colleagues, but found my way to, for me, a remarkable opportunity and position, which is where I currently serve as Patagonia's environmental advocate. It's a place where, in many ways, the lines between kind of my personal ambitions and my professional aspirations are almost invisible. It's a phenomenal company. In fact, very few like it, whose mission statement is to be in business to save the home planet. And to be able to work in the private sector at a company whose sole request of you is to advocate for the planet that you love and that you call home, That's really a privilege. And to do it with a group of people at Patagonia who are interesting, smart, and committed in many ways, Kevin, like the folks that we had the pleasure of working with in the Office of General Counsel, that's just a phenomenal opportunity for me.
At some point in the future, we're going to have number 13, the 13th person that's going to fill the role of General Counsel. What advice would you have for that person as they prepare and as they take over at some point?
I guess the number one piece of advice that I would give is to listen to the career staff. It's not that you need to simply be an empty, vessel or channel for that, and you have a role there as General Counsel to agree, to disagree, to engage in what I think would be the rightful kind of tug and pull or dialogue on the advice. And you may ultimately end up as the head of that office coming to a different legal conclusion, and the administrator ought to have your own views on that. But the notion of ever speaking to the administrator and providing advice without assuming you had the opportunity to do so, first conferring with your staff in the Office of General Counsel, I think does a grave disservice to the administrator and certainly to the agency as a whole. So if anybody were to ask me, the number one thing to do, it would be to make sure that you are inviting the advice of the experts in that office.
And for EPA, we started this podcast series because it's leading up to the 50th anniversary of EPA in December of 2020. What do you look at when you look into the future? What do you see for the next 50 years for EPA, building on what it's accomplished so far?
So my hope is that we are soon to reach a turning point when it comes to kind of the arc of politics for environmental issues. And I think it's unfortunate that EPA has found itself to be in the fulcrum of that divide. There was a time in the early 90s when both political parties certainly had their green wings and environmental bona fides. And we all know, of course, that the agency was kind of the legislation for the agency was signed by a Republican president. Most of our major environmental laws were signed by either Republican presidents or passed by extreme majorities, both in the House and the Senate. That's not the case anymore. And I think it has become more and more difficult for the agency to escape the problems of the politics that surround it. And I think this has made the science a little bit more difficult to communicate to folks. This has presented greater challenges for the very health protections that I think the agency is best suited to confer under the laws. And my hope, certainly going forward, is that the American people will eventually see through this and see the agency for what it is, which is a guardian of the science, an exemplar of the environmental rule of law, and true to its mission to protect the environment and public health of the American people. So I see a continuing vitality there. The need for this agency is as great as it ever was. I think it is wrong to suggest, as some do, that because we have made so much progress in this country in environmental pollution, that the needs are somehow less or the problems are somehow easier to overcome. We've got environmental justice and inequities around this country that are in some communities as grave as they've ever been. And I think the agency has an important role to play there. So, my hope as we go forward is that the morale at the agency is restored and rebuilt, that the confidence that the American people have in it is restored, and if not remains high as it ought to be, and that we kind of clear away this cloud of politics and let the science shine a little bit.
With that, Avi, thank you so much for your time today. I'd like to thank all the folks here at ELI who have made this possible.
To our listeners, be on the lookout for another episode of the General Counsels Opinions series. Thanks again to Kevin, Avi, and to our podcast production team.
Thank you for tuning in to People, Places, Planet Pod, brought to you by the Environmental Law Institute. We would like to hear from you, so please send us your questions, comments, and ideas to podcast@eli.org. And if you're interested in learning more about our work, attending one of our events, reading our publications, or becoming a member, please visit our website at www.eli.org.